Joined now by Brandon Ramsey of Kentucky Sports Radio, a recurring guest here on the Rebound Rundown. And as always, if you're watching on YouTube, you can watch the full episode of the Rebound Rundown in audio format on all major podcast platforms. But Brandon, we've had you on a few times here over the last few seasons, and it's great to talk to you. You really do an outstanding job with your film breakdowns and everything else that you thread after Kentucky games. I enjoy listening or watching them, reading them, and it's how I consume a lot of Kentucky content. So I appreciate the work that you've done this season to cover the team, and I want to get your thoughts here going down the stretch for this Kentucky group that has been severely injured at the point guard position. You have Jackson Robinson, you have Kirk Risa, you have Lamont Butler, all these guys, game in, game out, Kentucky having to deal with a rotating backcourt. Where do you see Kentucky right now as a team?
Yeah, I think, it really is a dichotomy between healthy Kentucky and injured Kentucky, because Lamont Butler is so crucial to everything that Kentucky does, both offensively and probably even honestly more so defensively. And we know this is a Kentucky team that struggled some on the defensive end of the floor. Evan Miyakawa actually just put something out ranking Lamont Butler like 8th in terms of, I forget what it was, but like box score impact essentially or something like that. And, you look at some of the players behind him, it was like Cam Jones at Marquette. It was Mark Sears at Alabama. It was Ryan Nembhard at Gonzaga. Like, imagine those teams without those guys. That's what Kentucky's living without Lamont Butler. Like, it's not, I don't think, hyperbole to say that. So right now, I've kind of been in a holding pattern of like, hey, if there's no Lamont Butler, if there's no Jackson Robinson, like any and all expectations kind of have to be put on hold, because this is a different team that we've watched all season long. And quite frankly, without those two guys, Kentucky's a pretty average team. Now, does that mean they can't find ways to win some games? No, I think they'll continue to, scratch and claw and put some things together to win games, but especially with how incredibly tough the SEC is. Like, there's a lot of these games you could lose at full strength, and now you're missing your second and third leading scorer plus your backup point guard. It's hard to really go into any game feeling super confident about it at this point.
Yeah, the SEC, as we've covered all season, is historically good this year. But you pointed something out this morning that I thought was really interesting. You tweeted that Kentucky's worst loss of the season by the net was against the 42nd ranked team in the country in the net right now, Arkansas. There are only 6 teams in college basketball who have not lost to a team ranked lower than 42. That's Bama, Auburn, Duke, Florida, Tennessee, and Wisconsin. UK is 4-1 against that group of teams. But even more interesting than that was your follow-up to it, because you pointed out that Kentucky lost at home to South Carolina back in 2023. That South Carolina team was 221st on KenPom. This year, South Carolina, they still have yet to win a game in the SEC, but they're 80th in the country. And that really, just like you said, underscores how good this conference is from top to bottom.
It truly is a gauntlet. Like, it's hard almost to explain it to people that aren't kind of living it day by day, whether it's cheering or covering for an SEC team. But I thought that provided some pretty interesting context that honestly I didn't even realize. Like, I wouldn't have guessed that it was that drastic, where one of the worst teams in the SEC just 2 seasons ago was in the 220s. Like, that's where you see, average mid-major teams in the 220s in KenPom. And then here, that's an SEC team, and now they can't even win a game in the conference, yet they're a top 80 team in college basketball. So it really is kind of mind-blowing, really, just how incredibly tough this league is, not just at the top. Obviously, when you're talking about potential 1 seeds in Auburn and Alabama and Tennessee and Florida, but then going down even to the teams that are really struggling and won't make the NCAA tournament, like an LSU or a South Carolina or even an Arkansas that's on the bubble. Like, these teams are really pretty darn good, and you got to play 18 of these games, and it just makes it really hard to put together a win-loss record that is kind of up to standard of some of these programs. Now, you're also going to see some historic numbers of quad 1 wins and some resumes that I think are going to be kind of confounding in terms of like, well, normally a 4 seed is 25-6, but Kentucky has 13 quad one wins. What do we do about that on Selection Sunday? It's going to be interesting to see how the committee kind of parses all this out come Selection Sunday.
Kentucky's struggled defensively at different points this season, and really for most of the season. I don't think there's any doubt about that. Do you think Kentucky is trending in the right direction toward that, or do you look at the way that they closed the game the other day where they get outscored 16-6 in that final stretch and you're scratching your head? Do you think that's maybe more due to an instability at the point guard play? Is it bad defense? Is this really something that's going to hold Kentucky back to reach their ceiling in March?
I think it probably keeps them from being a legitimate title contender. Like I think we've seen teams with this sort of a profile make runs to the Final Four. I mean, it's really not all that dissimilar to what we saw from Alabama last year. Quite frankly, I think at least the metrics would indicate that Kentucky's better defensively than that Alabama team was last year. Alabama finished the year after making the Final Four 111th in KenPom adjusted defensive efficiency last year. Kentucky right now is 76th. So that's really, a semi-significant gap there. But yeah, I mean, there's no denying it. Kentucky's defense hasn't been good at full strength. It's been even worse not at full strength. Now, I will say, you mentioned, is it trending in the right direction or the wrong direction, whatever it may be. Small sample size alert here, but Bart Torvik would say that over the last 3 games, Kentucky's defensive efficiency is 19th in the country. Now, some of that is the competition that Kentucky's played. South Carolina is in that group still. Tennessee is not exactly a record-breaking offense. Even in the loss to Texas, Kentucky was able to, guard a little bit better than average. So I don't think that that's the new norm for Kentucky, but it does show that over a few game stretch here that you can at least piece some things together defensively. So no, I don't think it's a fatal flaw that's going to get them beat by St. Peter's or Oakland necessarily, but I also don't know if it's cutting down the nets in San Antonio either.
What's the health status of this team right now, Brandon?
Good question. You want to ask Mark Pope that? I don't. It's one of those things. Coaches get put in impossible situations with these sort of things. Like, I'm not one, probably because I've been a coach myself before. Like, I don't get mad the way some of the media gets mad when they don't really answer these questions or they kind of give non-answers to the questions. But I mean, the short answer is we don't really know. Like, Lamont Butler is practicing to some extent, but it's not really contact. His shoulder's really banged up, and we just got to figure out, what does it look like when he does take a hit, or what does it look like when he does go to the basket and get knocked down to the floor? Like, we're probably not going to bring him back until we know that he can bounce back from one of those hits. And I think that's kind of what they're trying to figure out through some practice stuff right now. I am confident that we will see him again this season. When that comes, I don't really know. With Jackson Robinson, I think Coach Pope mentioned in his show last night, he is not using his right hand currently, which for a right-handed shooter is not good news. So, I think that his could unfortunately be maybe even a longer issue than Lamont Butler, because I think Lamont Butler's, this isn't, questioning toughness certainly of him by any means, but I think it's a pain tolerance kind of issue right now for Lamont Butler. I think it's just in such extreme pain that he can't go. With Jackson Robinson, I think it's more of like, hey, I physically cannot shoot with my right hand right now. So, but both of them, I would say that, silver lining, we might see them by March, but the less optimistic view is like, they ain't playing tomorrow, that's for sure. So, we just got to see, and kind of, I just keep saying, you're sort of just kind of, you're trying to kick the can down the road game to game, week to week, until you get these guys back, because quite frankly, unless you get them back, we're kind of just playing the games to play the games at this point. Nothing, super exciting is going to happen if you don't have those guys in March.
So this will be out on Wednesday morning. Kentucky has a game at Rupp Arena tonight against Vanderbilt on Wednesday night as we record this here on Tuesday. Brandon, can you just maybe give us a quick preview of this Vanderbilt game tonight? And then after you're done with that, you still have Alabama, still have Auburn, still have Missouri on the schedule going forward, and kind of a pesky Oklahoma team too, and that's on the road. Just first start with Vandy, a little more in-depth on the Commodores, and then from there what you want to see out of Kentucky down the stretch to close the regular season.
Yeah, so Vanderbilt, I mean, they've been one of the more surprising teams, certainly in the SEC and maybe in college basketball this season. They have really overachieved probably any and all expectations there in Nashville and proven themselves to be a legitimate NCAA tournament team this year. They got a guard in Jason Edwards from North Texas who's been excellent throughout the season. He had 18 points in the first game against Kentucky where they won down in Nashville. They had a couple of their bigger guys step out and make some threes that maybe Kentucky didn't necessarily expect. Maybe you'll be able to tighten up on those guys a little bit more. Vanderbilt was 12 of 33 from three down in there in Nashville to help them win that game. But as we've been talking about, all of these things, both, finding the points to win, but then also getting the stops, like it's harder without Butler and Creasa and Robinson. And then it's not just missing those guys in a vacuum. You then are putting people in kind of uncomfortable roles and uncomfortable positions because they're out. So it kind of makes everybody else, maybe a little bit worse, honestly, in their own roles because they're having to do things outside of their comfort zones or outside of their skill sets. Vanderbilt's a very talented team, more talented certainly than I expected them to be this season. They can shoot the ball a little bit. They pressure you some defensively on the ball. They're as good as anybody in the conference in forcing turnovers, which isn't something you want to hear if you're a team without a point guard going into the game. So it's going to be a tough one, but it is one that, regardless of the depleted roster, like, the loss at Texas doesn't really hurt you. At the end of the day, it's a quad 1A loss. Like, you can survive those. And we saw that, like, in a lot of the bracketology stuff, like Kentucky dropped from 10 to 11 overall. They're still a 3 seed. But if you lose at home to Vanderbilt, like, that's probably a seed line loss. Like that, you start to hurt yourselves with a loss like that. So it is one kind of regardless that Kentucky needs to find a way to win, especially, and this was the frustration at the end of the Texas game. It wasn't so much that we lost at Texas. Kentucky was an underdog without those guys. I think a lot of people didn't necessarily expect to win at Texas, but you put yourself in a position to win at Texas, and then you look at, you mentioned Alabama, at Missouri, at Alabama. It's hard to see the wins on the schedule. So when you have an opportunity to get one, it's like, man, we better go ahead and close this out because it could get real hairy real quick. And I think that's kind of where you're looking at with Vanderbilt. It's not like that would be the most exciting win in Kentucky basketball history, but they do all count the same on the, in the SEC standings. So I think that you need to find a way to get this one, because now if you start going into the game at Alabama and then Auburn comes to Rupp, all this stuff, it's like, man, you got to find some wins somewhere. And, this one and the game you still have at Rupp Arena against LSU, probably your best chances, especially with a depleted roster, to try to find some wins.
Brandon, great as always. I love having you on here on the show. Go ahead and tell people where they can find you. Do the Brandon Ramsey College Basketball Show as well. So where people can find you, listen to you, read your stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah, the best place to stay up to date with everything that I'm doing is on Twitter at BRamseyKSR. But yes, I host the Brandon Ramsey College Basketball Show every Monday and Friday. Also have a live YouTube show every Wednesday at 12:30 p.m. Eastern Time on the Brandon Ramsey College Basketball Show channel. So go subscribe to that. All the written work is on KentuckySportsRadio.com. And again, it's at BRamseyKSR on Twitter for all my college basketball content.
Appreciate it, Brandon. Talk soon.
Yep. Anytime.